Emmerdale tease that the village will soon be consumed by a storm of betrayal, ambition, and dangerous secrets, unleashed by none other than Joe Tate. Gone was the hesitant young man once seen wandering the edges of power, unsure of his place in the ruthless Tate dynasty. In his place returned a man shaped by bitterness and banishment, a man now willing to do whatever it took to command the legacy he once fled from. Joe's return to Emmerdale was not one of reconciliation. It was a reckoning. From the moment his boots touched the gravel road outside Home Farm, Joe's intentions were sharpened. No longer content with Kim Tate's approval, he was determined to carve out his dominion, an empire within the Tate empire. The once broken stepson now wielded charm as a weapon, manipulation as currency, and revenge as his compass. Joe's immediate goal was to prove himself to Kim, a challenge no less than navigating through a minefield. Kim was no fool. Her years in power had been defined by a near-obsessive control and a deep suspicion of loyalty. Trust was a currency she rarely traded in, and for Joe, earning it would mean walking through fire. His past was a permanent stain. He had once tried to drug her to benefit Gregory Crowley, a man whose very name was poison in Kim's ears. Yet Kim allowed Joe back into the fold, perhaps driven by a mix of curiosity and desire to keep enemies close. She tasked him with the dirty work, the ruthless kind that left no fingerprints, but always left blood. Land takeovers. Silent blackmail. Strategic leaks to rival estates. Joe did it all, flawlessly. Each act brought him a step closer to the throne, but also deeper into moral decay. But Joe's ambitions didn't end with playing the role of Kim's errand boy. Beneath the surface, he began orchestrating a plan of his own. It started with a discovery. Hidden deep in the company's financial records, masked behind shell entities and blind trusts, was a dormant asset, an investment Kim had quietly parked in Dubai under a pseudonym. The fund was substantial. Untraceable. Unclaimed. Joe didn't alert Kim. Instead, he rewired the transaction path subtly, creating a funnel through which the asset would reroute into an entity under his own control. The sophistication of the scheme was breathtaking. Even Kim, the queen of concealment, would struggle to sniff it out unless someone directly fed her the truth. And someone nearly did. Enter Gregory Crowley. The man once exiled from Emmerdale by Kim's fury now returned, summoned from the shadows by Joe. Their truce was uneasy. Crowley had his reasons for vengeance. Kim had ruined his empire, slashed his credit lines, and nearly had him arrested. Joe offered him redemption, access to rural development rights, and a portion of the Tate's crumbling investments. In return, Crowley gave Joe legitimacy through silent partnerships, funds to seed his Dubai diversion, and a whispered promise, "We'll bury her together." Joe told himself this wasn't betrayal. It was restoration. He wasn't taking what was Kim's, he was reclaiming what he was denied. He had Tate blood. And this time, he wouldn't be shut out of the legacy. But secrets fester. And Emmerdale, with its gossamer-thin walls and echoing whispers, was never a place to hide sin. Kim felt it first. A tremor in the balance. Subtle inconsistencies in quarterly reports. Missing details. Transactions with no faces. She didn't confront Joe immediately. Instead, she summoned a private investigator, someone who owed her more than just loyalty. As the audit quietly unfolded, tension thickened in Home Farm. She watched Joe with new eyes. And Joe, sharp as ever, noticed. Then, chaos. News broke. Moira Dingle had been found unconscious outside Wishing Well Cottage. A blunt force trauma to the back of the head had left him comatose. The village spiraled into fear and confusion. Who would harm Zach, peaceful, eccentric Zach? Cain Dingle, Zach's son, wasted no time. He scoured the area and discovered a grainy recording from a hidden trail camera set by the woods. The footage wasn't clear, but it showed a dark vehicle idling near the scene. The license plate traced back to a defunct security firm, one Joe had used in prior operations. It didn't prove guilt, but it stoked suspicion. Kane confronted Joe in the woolpack. Their exchange was icy. "You better hope that wasn't your car out by the cottage, Joe." Joe didn't blink. "And you better hope you're chasing the right ghost, Kane." Privately, Joe had ordered no assault. His intention had only been to pressure Zach. After learning the old man had been speaking to Lisa about a patch of land tied to the Dingles that Joe coveted. A conversation here. A warning there. But someone, somewhere, had taken things too far. Joe suspected Crowley. But he couldn't prove it. Meanwhile, Kim's investigator handed her a flash drive. Recordings. Emails. Transfers. Most damning of all, an audio clip. Joe and Crowley, speaking candidly. Joe's voice unmistakable. "I'm not hiding behind Kim anymore. This time, I'll build something bigger, and I'll bury her if I have to." Kim listened in silence. Her betrayal was complete. She didn't confront Joe. Not directly. She turned to an unlikely ally, Kane. She offered him the drive, laid out the evidence, and carefully planted the seed. "Your father's lying in a hospital bed. You want justice. Or revenge?" Kane took the drive, but he didn't give her an answer. Elsewhere, Gabby Thomas sat alone with a secret of her own. Her past with Joe was turbulent, professional entanglements, flirtations, and unfulfilled power plays. She had long harbored resentment toward Dawn, whose growing influence over the business had sidelined Gabby's ambitions. Joe had once whispered promises: if she backed him, he'd help her regain control. In return, Gabby had kept quiet about the Joe Crowley alliance. But with Kim cornering the chessboard, Gabby made her move. She visited Kim under the guise of concern. But her words were sharp. "If you want my loyalty, you deal with Dawn. Permanently." Kim didn't respond immediately. But a slight nod sealed a pact darker than either anticipated. As tensions exploded across the village, Joe found himself on an unraveling tightrope. His manipulations teetered on exposure. His allies, Crowley, Gabby, were double-edged blades. And Kane was circling. The climax built with eerie calm. Joe returned to home farm, not in defiance, but with a plan. At midnight, he stepped into the study where so many of Kim's plots had once begun. In his hand was a folder. Thick, damning, and meticulously organized. The documents inside were time bombs, proof that Kim had funneled money from old partners, fabricated debts, and committed financial fraud extensive enough to obliterate her image forever. He placed the file on her desk and looked straight at the camera above. "If I go down," he said calmly, "she goes down too." And with that, Joe left home farm, his fate uncertain. But the real question lingered in every whispered conversation, every narrowed glance across the village square. Had Joe really ordered the attack on Zach Dingle? Or was someone else moving their piece across the board while everyone watched the wrong player? As the next dawn approached, Emmerdale stood on the edge of collapse. Betrayals had been exposed. Alliances had been broken. And Kim Tate, once untouchable, was bleeding power. The silence after Joe's declaration at home farm echoed far beyond the estate's gilded walls. In the following days, the village's undercurrents grew darker. Suspicion spread like smoke. Kim Tate, once untouchable, now found herself navigating a maze of uncertainty. She had weathered betrayals before, but this one was personal. Joe had forced her hand. And Kim, with all her venom and precision, never allowed anyone to dictate her next move. Behind closed doors, she summoned Gabby Thomas again. The young woman arrived guarded, clutching her own ambitions like armor. Kim studied her with the cold precision of a queen surveying a lesser piece. "You'll have your chance at dawn," Kim said at last. "But when the time comes, there's no turning back." Gabby didn't flinch. "Neither of us can afford mercy anymore." Kim had already begun orchestrating the takedown. Dawn's influence over the company was fragile, a result of trust, not strategy. All Kim needed was a whisper of incompetence, a forged email chain, and a botched decision. The documents were already being drawn up. Meanwhile, Joe remained elusive. He had not returned to home farm since that midnight confrontation. Rumors swirled. He was in London rallying legal protections, or abroad consolidating control over Crowley's assets. The truth, however, was simpler. Joe had retreated to the Dales, staying in an old cottage that once belonged to his biological father. Solitude served him well. It was there he plotted his final move. But Kane Dingle wasn't waiting. Fueled by anger, Kane drove toward the outskirts of the village, replaying every moment: Zack in the hospital, the recording from Kim, and Joe's past trespasses. Though the evidence wasn't conclusive, it was damning enough. Zack's attack wasn't random. Someone had wanted to shut him up. And Joe had motive. Kane finally caught up with him at the edge of the moor. Joe, calm as ever, offered no defense. "You think I wanted Zack hurt?" he asked. "I respected him." "You respected nothing," Kane hissed. "You want to be Kim so badly, you've turned into something worse." "I never gave that order," Joe replied. "But maybe I should've. Maybe it's time people realized what power looks like." The fight didn't come with fists, it came with truths. Kane left with no satisfaction, only a vow: if Zack died, Joe wouldn't walk free. At the hospital, Lisa Dingle sat vigil beside her husband. Doctors remained cautious. Zack's brain swelling had stabilized, but consciousness eluded him. The Dingles, one by one, trickled in with offerings of food, stories, and prayers. But Lisa's eyes rarely left the machines. Gabby, too, watched from the periphery of the drama, aware that timing was everything. She received word from Kim. Dawn was to make a crucial pitch before the board, a final test. Kim had arranged for Gabby to plant a file, fraudulent projections, laced into Dawn's presentation, that would spark accusations of malpractice. The night before the meeting, Gabby found herself standing outside Dawn's cottage, conflicted. Joe's ghost lingered in every corner of her thoughts. He had made promises, but his silence since the fallout cast doubt. Still, Gabby stepped into the shadows and completed her task. There was no turning back now. Dawn's meeting the next morning unraveled exactly as Kim had envisioned. Within minutes of presenting her numbers, a senior member questioned the data. By the end of the session, Dawn's credibility lay in tatters. She was suspended pending review. Gabby walked away victorious, but hollow. Power, she realized, came at the cost of humanity. Meanwhile, Crowley emerged from the shadows again. He met Joe in an abandoned granary outside Leeds, their temporary safe house. Crowley, ever the snake, was restless. "You've made too many enemies too quickly," he warned. Joe lit a cigarette, his voice low. "That's how I know I'm doing it right." But Crowley wasn't loyal. He had already begun negotiating with another party, an investor interested in acquiring Tate Holdings through hostile means. If Joe could bring down Kim, the investor would fund a total buyout, leaving both Joe and Crowley with seats at a new empire. Back in Emmerdale, Kim finally made her move. She called a press conference, under the guise of charity, but with a more strategic purpose. In front of reporters, she publicly distanced herself from Joe. She admitted there had been unauthorized financial actions by a rogue associate within the company. No names were given, but the implication was clear. Joe was officially disowned. It didn't stop there. Kim also submitted files to regulatory authorities, redacted just enough to protect herself, but damning enough to prompt an inquiry into Joe's holdings. It was a surgical betrayal. Joe's retaliation came days later. In the early hours of the morning, a package arrived at the Woolpack. Inside were copies of the same documents Joe had left at home farm, only now, they were sent anonymously to local news editors, rival estate agents, and several government officials. Within hours, headlines began circulating, Tate Empire under scrutiny. Kim's image cracked. Kane, now armed with confirmation that Joe had not directly ordered Zach's assault, hesitated. But he still believed Joe was a danger. Lisa, however, surprised everyone. One morning, she left Zach's bedside and went straight to the Dingle Land Registry. What she found made her hands tremble. Joe had submitted a claim on their border properties, land that had belonged to the Dingles for over 4 generations. It was legal, but barely. He'd found an old loophole. Lisa went straight to Gabby, demanding answers. Gabby, now regretting her part in the unraveling chaos, confessed partially. She admitted Joe had ambitions for the land, but swore she didn't know he'd go that far. The damage was done. Lisa, in a rare act of fury, went to home farm herself. She confronted Kim in the drawing room. Their words were sharp, quiet, deadly. He may be your blood, Lisa said, but he's poisoned everything he's touched. I don't control him anymore, Kim replied, colder than steel. Then stop pretending you're not part of it. Later that night, Kane and Lisa met alone, just beyond the barn. They spoke of justice, not through courts or documents, but Emmerdale's own way. Kane didn't argue. He understood. Joe, sensing the net tightening, gathered what he needed. He moved funds, secured new allies, and planned one final strike. His target wasn't Kim. It was Crowley. He had discovered the betrayal, the back-channel deal with outside investors. Joe met Crowley alone, this time armed with a recording device and a dossier of Crowley's own financial crimes. It ended swiftly. Crowley would disappear, or Joe would expose him. Crowley fled. As Joe returned to Emmerdale, the village watched. Some with fear, some with hatred. Even the children whispered his name. Then came the storm. Zach woke. His first words were a whisper, it wasn't him. The village froze. Zach described the night, he'd been threatened, yes. But the blow had come from someone unexpected. A younger man, panicked, sent to deliver a warning. It wasn't Joe. It was someone working for Crowley, operating on fear, not orders. The truth didn't absolve Joe, but it shifted the narrative. Kim, hearing of Zach's confession, found herself torn. For the first time, she wondered, had she gone too far? Had she made Joe what he became? One final meeting was arranged. Kim and Joe, face to face at home farm. No lawyers. No witnesses. You tried to destroy me, she said. I learned it from you. You're not like me, Joe. You still care what they think. Maybe I do. But I won't stop until everything you built is mine. Kim, for the first time in years, smiled, not with warmth, but with recognition. Then fight me properly. Let's see who the real Tate is. As the sun set over Emmerdale, the fields quieted. But beneath the peace, war brewed. Kim versus Joe. Gabby caught in the middle. Kane and Lisa weighing their vengeance. Zach recovering, knowing his voice alone could shift the village's fate. And in the distance, Crowley watched. Waiting. The game was no longer about business. It was legacy, blood, and survival.